Okay, welcome everyone to another Ridge Vineyards virtual winemaker roundtable. Thank you for joining us. We've got, like to introduce first myself. I'm Mark Vernon. I'm the president and CEO here at Ridge Vineyards. And today we're joined by Shauna Rosenblum, who is our winemaker at Lytton Springs, and David Gates, who's our Senior Vice President of Vineyard Operations, overseeing all our vineyards, and then John Olney, our head winemaker. So welcome, and thank you for joining us as well. Before we get started, to cover a few little housekeeping items. When we do these virtual tastings and roundtables on Zoom, we like to make use of the Q&A function on Zoom if you have a question, because we like to encourage questions. So if you have a question for any of our panelists today, please, if you can, type those questions into the Q&A area, and we will do the best we can to either ask the question live or respond in a typewritten answer, whichever is most appropriate. And then we also like to have you use the chat function, and the chat function is a nice way to interact with each other or simply share a thought. And in fact, one of the things we always like to do is have you say hello, tell us where you're watching from, and maybe also share with us which wines you have open today. And in addition to doing that on chat here on this seminar or this roundtable, you could also tag us on social media at Ridge Vineyards. That would be great. So with that, I wanted to just mention that we, every year, for those of you who know Ridge, we always try to work hard at coming up with some special holiday offerings. And we've done that again this year, where we pair up some of our favorite wines and also dig into our library and come out with some interesting library releases. And all of our holiday gift packs are now available. They are on our website. And also, we're going to put some links into the chat here today as well that you can use to get there and check them all out. So I encourage you to do that when you have a moment. So with that, I think we'll also make a mention that for the past few years, we've been doing for the holidays a feast pairing, and that involves looking at some foods and recipes and trying to make suggestions about what we think goes well with each of our wines. And the theme for this year's feast and pairing is go local. So we're really featuring a number of our favorite local producers for different types of things like cheese and meats. And I think you'll enjoy the items that we've selected and the wines that we've paired them with in our feast. And you can get everything all together in the big feast package, or you can simply pair individual dishes or items with the wines as you please. So take a look at that. It's always fun. In fact, some of the inspiration is involved in this background that we're sitting in front of right here. Some of the feast items are on that table back there, and I'm just getting hungry looking at them. So let's sort of jump in, and maybe we'll start off just a little bit before we get into the wines and talk a little bit about the 2024 harvest, which we've completed. And I think it's always fun to let everyone know how things went. So maybe, John, why don't you start off and give us a little overview, and then Dave and Shauna can add to that.
Sure. So it was quite a big swing coming off of 2023, where we had one of the longest, most drawn out harvests that I can remember. At Montebello in 2023, we were finishing just about today, just about November 14th. And so when we got to 2024, it was a little bit of a kind of a mixed start in the spring. It was warm, then it was cold and warm and cold and warm. So we got kind of started off sort of in fits and starts. But then as the season went along, things really started ripening pretty quickly once we hit August. So we started at both wineries in about the third week of August. But then it was a pretty condensed harvest, especially at Montebello. We were done, I think, on October 2nd. And so that's really quite early. Having said that, the wines really are looking great. There's some tremendous concentration to them, balance, great color. And likewise, I think we got some terrific wines up at Lytton with all of our Zinfandels. And Shauna, maybe you want to say a few things about what was going on up at Lytton Springs?
Yeah. We, just like you said, we had some fun new Zinfandels that we added to the portfolio this year. The Papera Ranch definitely comes to mind. The Bellany, both Old Mine Vineyards, really beautiful old Zin blends and just very expressive vineyards. We kind of saw early on that this was it was a flavor year, which is really exciting. I would say 21 and 23 kind of remind me of each other, and 22 and 24 kind of remind me of each other as far as the finished wine. Concentration, great structure, great flavor. Yeah, and I think this was the first time in Ridge history that Lytton Springs finished harvest after Montebello. Is that, I think I'm quoting that correctly.
That was indeed.
And that's really all due to our Alder Springs vineyard, which where our Falangina and Vermentino grow way up in rural Mendocino County. But the fruit was great. I mean, just, really beautiful flavors, great acidity, kind of ideal, really. We had great weather. It was never super hot. I mean, we had, a little heat spell in July and August, but compared to 2022, we, had that heat dome on September 5th that reached 115 degrees. And we really didn't have that type of extreme weather in 2024. We had some heat, but nothing like that. And I think the fruit is just really consistent, really great. Can't wait to share some of this with you guys. And we're bottling the 2024 rosé in a couple of weeks, which feels wild. The labels just arrived, and seeing 2024 on a label, had to shake it off for a second. It's like, no, this is reality. We're doing that. But the rosé is great. Everything's really great. So can't wait to share it with you guys.
Super. Dave, maybe a couple comments from the vineyard and growing side about 2024?
Yeah, let's see. We enjoyed a second year in a row of really good rainfall, so the vines were very happy. And even though 2024 was probably the hottest year on record for California, as Shauna said, at Lytton Springs, it was just another nice summer. Hot days, cool nights, everything kind of chugged along and got ripe normally. And you see that on the North Coast. It's inland California that saw the really extreme heats this year. Montebello, we'd never get as hot as it gets at Lytton Springs at Montebello because we're up above the inversion layer, but our nights are always warmer. And what that means is that the vines of Montebello were kind of in the sweet spot, viticulturally speaking, and so they were able to really photosynthesize, and the crop wasn't quite as big as we thought it was at the beginning. So from July on, the vines just cranked, and this is the first time in our 60+ year history that we finished our Cabernet harvest in September at Montebello. We've never done that before. So that's welcome to climate change.
Yeah.
All right, great. So yeah, I think we're all pretty excited about the quality of the 24 wines.
Absolutely.
Already, just as you said, I like your description, Shauna, a vintage of flavor, right? So very flavorful wines. And So it's really exciting. And we're also pretty excited about the 23s coming along and getting ready to be bottled. They're really showing well too. So I think we've got a couple of terrific vintages here coming along.
Yeah,
Okay.
23 was so elegant. And yeah, like we're with the 24 rosé that we're bottling, we're pulling up the 23 East Bench, the 23 Green and Red, and a new vineyard for you all called Planchen. New to Ridge, not new, planted in the 1800s. But out in Contra Costa County, super old vines. Can't wait to share that with you guys too.
Okay, well, I think it's time to start tasting. And the first wine we have up is the Pinot Noir. And I think there's still quite a few people don't realize that we've started making some very relatively small productions of Pinot Noir. And this particular Pinot Noir is from the Corralitos area. And I'm going to go ahead and let Dave talk about the wine and also explain to people where the vineyard is, where it was located, and what attracted to us about that location. So go ahead, Dave.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. So Corralitos is a little community next to Watsonville, just to the north of Watsonville, right on the coast. Well, 4 or 5 miles from the coast. And just below the Santa Cruz Mountains. So the Santa Cruz Mountains appellation is based on elevation. So on the ocean side, it's anything above 400 feet. And on the inland side, where we are, where Montebello is, it's anything above 800 feet in a defined area. It's a huge area. Corralitos is just below that. So that the Galley family has a little vineyard, and it tops out at like 390 feet. So that, which is why we call it Corralitos. That's a neat little area. It used to all be apples there. There still are quite a few apples. Now it's converted a bit to grapes and also some other
Ash crops.
some other alternate crops recently legalized, and a lot of housing, which and it's a neat area. It's all sandstone based, beautiful soils there, sedimentary, and the weather is quite mild. It's very good for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's typically, since it's below 400 feet, it's usually the fog sits in there, and it's below the fog though, so it gets cool and takes a bit to ripen. The Galley family had been growing blueberries on one piece of their land, and then they planted some grapes and had sold to a few different people. And we started in 2018, and not 19, 18, buying a bit of their Pinot Noir and a tiny bit of Chardonnay. They have several different clones of Pinot, and Pinot, it's a big thing about, everybody talks about clones and stuff, and it's true, different clones do make a difference with Pinot, more so probably than other varieties, mainly because Pinot's so old, and so there are some clones that have very big differences. The fruit here is on the more elegant side, I would say, of Pinot. It's not something that it's not a wine that has big extraction like you might get in the Santa Lucia Highlands or something like that. I'd say it's more elegant, and it has, for me, it's more maybe on the strawberry side. And then if you smell it, there's also some, I would say, almost kind of autumnal spices, right? So cinnamon, clove, things like that, things that you would cook with in around this time of year, which I really like on that. And then it's very subtle tannin, or supple tannins, I would say, and a long, easy finish. And I think that 2021 is the last year of the Corralitos Pinot Noir. We're switching over to Petaluma Gap, where we have one or two vineyards there that seem to be really nice. So, Ridge hasn't made a Pinot for a long time, but we did make a Pinot. Paul made a Pinot in 1971. So it's not it's not new to us, but it was a one-off for a little bit. But yeah, we're excited, and it's really fun to kind of take that exploratory nature that is the advanced tasting program and kind of look at other varieties and different areas, and just to dip our toes and see what you all think about it, and we hope you enjoy it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's like strawberry rhubarb pie. It's so pretty.
Yep.
I love it because it's, like you said, it's that strawberry fruit, but it's not just like tutti frutti. It's got that nice kind of savory aspect. It's really quite elegant.
Yeah, and this wine was never tutti frutti. It never was that bubblegum Pinot. And I think that's because of where it's grown.
Right.
That sandstone and sand, it makes those tannins elegant and not in your face either. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think we discussed if we were going to make a Pinot, we were interested in trying to find some cooler areas to make that sort of classic expression of Pinot. And given the proximity of this vineyard to the ocean and the cooling breezes from the ocean, it was something we thought would be would make for an interesting cooler climate Pinot Noir, but yet still warm enough to get the grapes fully ripe. And that's always the trick with Pinot is, if you're trying to make that cooler climate version of Pinot, you always are there's a little danger or risk that you might not be able to get those grapes fully ripe, right? And then you may end up with something that's not so pleasant. But in the couple of years that we worked with the Corralitos Vineyard, I think, Dave, we pretty much were able to get those grapes ripe each year, right?
Absolutely. Yes. It was always kind of a worried about it a little bit in August, because there's this, so I went to school for a few years down in San Diego, and in June in San Diego, it's almost like, really foggy. Well, Corralitos and Watsonville, they kind of have a Fogust, right? It's like August is always cool, but then it always seems to change a little bit, and then September comes along, and everything just kind of creeps along and gets ripe. But that's actually really good for Pinot because it doesn't bake the fruit when it's it doesn't get super hot there. So that's very good.
John,
Excellent.
was this all American oak, or was there any French on it?
There was some French oak here, and the other thing I would mention on the winemaking side too is that in terms of the approach we take, we also really let the wine sort of sit on the lees longer than maybe some wineries do, and I think that also adds to that savory aspect that you were talking about, and it gives something to the wine more than just that signature, sort of fruit expression that we expect to find in Pinot Noir.
It's beautiful. It's even got like a little white pepper note on the nose.
And a nice thing about this wine too is we've seen that it's pretty enjoyable now, and yet we've also seen that it will benefit if you give it a year or two as well. So we don't really know what the total aging profile is yet, because we really haven't, we haven't been making this wine that long, but clearly, you can enjoy it right now, but you can, if you wait a year or two or three, you're probably gonna like the results as well. So that's at least I think what we found so far, and it's fun to see how these wines will evolve with time. So, okay, well, I think we're probably ready to move on to our next wine, and this is something special for Ridge. So the next wine that we're going to look at is our 2022 Lytton Springs, and with this vintage, we're actually celebrating the 50th anniversary of Ridge having started and made the first Lytton Springs 50 years ago. So it's one of those important anniversary vintages for us, and we like to celebrate that by putting a little extra something on the label so that you all know that this is our 50th anniversary of this wine. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and let Shauna tell you all about it, and also what we're interested in pairing this with as well. So go ahead, Shauna.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, 50th anniversary of Lytton Springs. Boy, I've been a wine club member at Ridge for about as long as I've been able to legally drink. And so, you know, tasting Lytton Springs throughout the years, that's always been one of my very favorite wines. And so joining the Ridge team in 2022 and having the opportunity to make this wine was just, you know, kind of a dream come true, to work with John and Dave and learn about these vineyards and just the way that all of these different blocks behave at our Lytton East and our Lytton West vineyards. And choosing, so each one of these blocks is an interplanted field blend. So if you talk about Lytton East, we can specifically talk about like North Flat 1. It's a field blend of Zinfandel, Carignan, Petit Syrah, Alicante Bouschet, Mataro, and each one of these blocks is fermented independently. So North Flat 1, we will call the pick. We'll say this tastes perfect. We want to bring in North Flat 1. All of North Flat 1 goes into one tank, which is a co-fermentation within itself of this one block. And then we go through all of these different blocks at Lytton, and we're tasting through the tanks. And, you know, that first year, geez, I learned so much from John. John and I were just like inseparable. It was just like, I need to know everything in this man's brain, and learn everything from Dave about the soil and the dirt and just everything about these vineyards. And something that John told me that first year, because I kept saying, oh, this smells great. This is this, this is this. And he kept telling me, Ridge wines are made in the mouth. This is about structure. This is about tannin. This is about balance. And if it smells good, that's a bonus. And so putting together this wine was, you know, such an honor. And my first vintage at Ridge being the 50th anniversary, just, I mean, it gives me chills, and it's such an honor to share with you all tonight here. Cheers to everybody. My virtual background allow me to cheers. There we go. Cheers, everybody.
Yeah.
So the 2022 growing year was, it was pretty good. It was an early spring, pretty mild. You know, the whole summer was like 78 to 82 degrees. Every day, John and I would come in kind of holding our breath, like, it's 78 again. This is great. 10-day forecast. Let's look at it. 78 to 82. Great. And so we were picking grapes very methodically. It was like, should we pick them today? Maybe tomorrow. Let's wait. It'll be perfect tomorrow. We really had the opportunity to fine tune our picking dates, which is not an opportunity that occurs every harvest. And then, you know, very end of August, we were looking at our 10-day forecast, and we saw 115 degrees in the forecast for September 5th. And we were in denial. We didn't want to believe it. And then it seemed like it was true. And we picked pretty feverishly to make sure that all of our Lytton Springs was pulled off before that 115 degrees hit. And I'm really grateful that, you know, we have such an incredible vineyard team that was able to make that happen. I mean, folks, we have such a robust vineyard team. I mean, when we say, hey, it's time to pick 100 tons in a night, and that means, you know, the team starts at 10 p.m. and they'll pick through 6 a.m. all night long to pick 100 tons for us. And that's that's like a maximum amount, but they can get it done, and they do it. It's all by hand. It's all extremely high quality, and I'm so grateful that we were able to get it off before the heat happened. And here we have the 50th anniversary of Lytton Springs, guys.
Mm-hmm. Well done, Shauna.
Yeah, very nice.
Thank you. Cheers to our team.
So we actually made a video to celebrate this 50th anniversary, and I encourage all of you to take a look at that when you get a chance. But maybe, John, you could highlight a little bit of that history and just talk about Lytton Springs in general, since you've been involved with it for quite a long time.
Sure. So 1972 was our was our first Lytton Springs when Paul Draper was up just at a local tasting room there and met the owner, Dick Sherwin of the vineyard at that time, and he asked Paul if he wanted to buy the fruit. Paul walked into the vineyard and took one look around and said, "Yep." So that's how we got started. Um, and what's really interesting, I think, about the vineyard is, we've been making Lytton Springs and Geyserville for the longest in terms of our portfolio of Zinfandels, and they're not that far away from each other. Geyserville is only about a mile and a half away on the other side of the freeway, um, and it's something which we do frequently is to taste them side by side. And what you do notice with Lytton Springs usually is that it does have darker fruit. There is more Petit Syrah in play in terms of the field blend, and the soils tend to lend themselves a bit more to Petit Syrah, whereas you have a lot more Carignan over at Geyserville. So, the texture of the wine really is, I think, it is front and center with Lytton Springs, and generally when you get that right, the rest of it follows. But it means that it's not the easiest wine to put together, because you can overdo it in terms of extraction, and then you end up with a wine that's kind of makes your mouth pucker. So I think we really did. We really got it right in 22. Shauna did a great job, and it's showing great now. But I think it's something that what that's one of the neat things about Lytton Springs. It's just how well it doesn't just stand up to time, but it really does develop over easily 10 years in any vintage. And we're still we're running out of bottles in the library, but we still pull out the 99, so that's a 25-year-old wine, which is just gorgeous.
Well, and I think we should talk about, we had this really incredible celebration at Lytton Springs for the 50th anniversary. Single Thread Farms catered the lunch, which is like a phrase you'll never hear, right? Single Thread Farms catered the lunch, and we had the opportunity to try the 1974 Lytton Springs, the 1984 Lytton Springs, and many other vintages. And I think I personally was shocked that the 1974 still showed primary fruit. I think we all remember it tasted like peaches.
Mm.
Yeah,
Which was-
Shauna, I wasn't worried about the 74 because that wine has just been a monster all along. I remember tasting it 25 or 30 years ago, and it was still like really young. For me, the neat part about that tasting, or one of the surprises, was the 84. It had that beautiful core of fruit, and it's one of those things with older zin blends like Lytton or Geyserville. They tend to just become a really nice claret, or
Right.
even like an old Bordeaux, but they have this core of Zinfandel fruit in the middle there, underneath everything. You always find that.
Well, and to your point, Dave, Liz Tosh, who's MW, wrote a really beautiful article for Forbes talking about that exact concept about aged Lytton Springs and Geyserville and how they kind of mimic claret. And, if any of you folks out there have the opportunity to try older Lytton Springs, older Geyserville, just please take that frame of reference when you're tasting it. It's pretty cool.
All right. Yeah, I think this Lytton is just tasting terrific right now. It's one of the great things about these wines is that you can just open them and enjoy them young. I mean, they really are tasting delicious. and yet you will be rewarded if you so choose to give the wine some time in the cellar as well. So, and I think again, it's always great when fall weather is upon us, and
Stoop season.
it's cooling down outside, and you bring up these are just really comfortable wines to have around this time of year. So it's just tasting terrific. Okay, I think we're gonna move on to our third wine, and the third wine is going to be our 2017 Perrone Merlot, which is a wine made from grapes from our Montebello estate. And this was part of a series we did where we were focusing on some individual parts of the vineyard, and doing smaller releases from those smaller segments of the vineyard. And I'm going to go ahead and let John tell you more about it.
Sure. So the Montebello Vineyard is it's a mosaic. It's like a patchwork of individual vineyard blocks that just runs right along the spine or the ridge of the vineyard, and it's divided up into sort of 4 different segments, or we call them ranches. And at the very top is the Perrone Vineyard, and it's named after Osea Perrone, who was the physician from San Francisco back in the 1880s, who first planted vineyards and had a winery, where we still have our winery today at the very, very top of the mountain. And so we have, throughout all of the different ranches that make up Montebello, we have, I'm going to say roughly, depending on how we pick things, we have about 9 or 10 different Merlot blocks. And everything, just like Shauna was mentioning with the Lytton Springs, we harvest each block separately, we ferment it separately, and then after it goes through malolactic fermentation, starting about this time of year, but then going into the new year, we will sit down and we start to assess them and choose whichever blocks we think best represent Montebello, and we blend those together to make the Montebello. We also then make our estate Cabernet, and after we've made those 2 primary wines, we may have a block, in this case of Merlot, that we think is excellent, but it just didn't fit in any one of the blends. So occasionally we will bottle a Merlot on its own, and that's what we did in 2017. And what's really neat, and to me also, I think, Merlot, it kind of, suffers a little bit from an identity crisis for various reasons. And, I think one of the best compliments we can get, and I hear often, is someone will try a Merlot from the mountain and say, I don't like Merlot, but I really like this. Our Merlot, it really is. I think it's different in the sense that there's something about the soil and the microclimate at Montebello that when you plant Merlot there, it's almost hard to recognize as Merlot, because it has so much structure, so much tannin, so much color. It's almost as intense as Cabernet.
Right.
But the 2017 really is it's really, really special. So so that's basically it's something that we make only from time to time, but we did do one in 2017. So I hope everyone has a chance to try it if you haven't.
John, to your point, my first assemblage tasting at Montebello. So the way that the Montebello wine is put together, we sit around this table and there's it takes days, and it kind of hurts because young Montebello is a little painful in your mouth. It's so structured. But I remember this one specific round. It's called an in and out. We have our control of our Montebello that we know is like, this is the core. And then we're trying to figure out what other blocks can we put in. And this is all done blind. We don't know what we're tasting. And I remember this one block that came through, and I love blind tasting. These guys know it. I love blind tasting. And so I make little like bets to myself, like, oh, I know what this is. And I remember this one lot that came through. I was like, oh man, this Petit Verdot is like insane. This is the most structured Petit Verdot I think I've ever tasted. And then at the end of the round, I found out that Petit Verdot was Merlot. And so that's how Merlot behaves on Montebello Mountain.
Yeah.
So Dave, talk a little bit about this specific part of the vineyard and where this Merlot is growing, and what are some of the challenges for Merlot and how you get the grapes to be so cooperative and delicious.
Yeah, so let's see. 2017, when we were so that was the year that broke the drought. We had a big drought. So Merlot is susceptible to bad weather at bloom. Cabernet doesn't, it doesn't mind it very much, but Merlot, if it gets cold, when the weather system comes up over from the ocean, it's usually about 55 degrees. Well, that's not good when vines are trying to flower, and that happened in 17. So the Merlot set a short crop, especially up at Perrone, up at top. So that's over 2,600 feet, and this was some vines that were planted in 1997, the West Block, and back then it was a 4-acre block, and I think we got maybe 6 tons from it, if that. And usually those young vines do a little bit better than that, but not in a year like 2017 when they shatter from bad weather at bloom. So what that did is it really concentrated the wine, and so Merlot has this really I'd say the cherry that we get, I always call it like Bing cherry, and we get a lot of cherry flavors in our Cabernet as well. But Merlot, it's like full on cherry pie, and I think that really helps it. And up there, the Merlot at the very top of the property, it always has really good structure. So if you can combine those two, it can be a very powerful wine, and they age really nicely too. So that the soil up there is on limestone. It's the Montebello limestone, which is really ancient limestone. It's not at all similar to the limestone that is down in Paso as far as age and origin of the limestone, but it does the same kind of thing, which means that it kind of ameliorates the acid rains that we have gotten over the years and keeps the soil in a really good spot for nutrient extraction for grapes, and also water retention. Merlot or limestone can hold some water, so the roots can kind of go down into that limestone that's been broken up by all the seismic activity over the many years, and extract that water. And that really helps us out up top too, because we don't really have much capability of irrigation. In fact, this West Block has been dry farmed since probably about 2005 or so.
Well, and limestone helps keep the soil a little cooler, right, Dave?
Yeah, but we don't worry about that at Montebello because it doesn't really
Never.
get that hot. Yeah,
Right.
it doesn't really get that hot.
Well, and that West Block, even though you hear West, you think, oh, it's going to get that hot Western sun, and yet it's also really exposed to the cool. It really can pick up that cool air from the ocean because of where that block happens to be located, right?
Absolutely, and it's in a little bowl too, so the top of it gets right before the bottom of the block, even though it's only a 4-acre block. Which I have to say, for Montebello, a 4-acre block is in the moderate to moderately large size.
Gigantic.
Are smaller than that. Anyway,
What blows me away is just smelling this wine. I smell the Montebello-ness. Like I smell the mountain, I smell the character of the site even more than the varietal. Which is just I don't know. I continue to be enamored and fascinated by this mountain.
Well, and again, you see what the mountain does to Merlot, because a lot of people might think of Merlot as something softer or easier. And in fact, many Merlots can be that way, especially depending on where they're growing. But when you grow Merlot up on Montebello Ridge, it's a more serious wine, right? We say there's more structure. There's definitely more tannin and structure to these Merlots than a softer Merlot that's being grown in a lower elevation valley type of setting. So yeah, and I think, and again, it's when we do those blind tastings, it can fool you. You go, as you described, you thought it was Petit Verdot. There's times when I thought it was Cabernet, and no, it's
I would have
not.
bet money. I would have bet money.
And it's like, wait a minute, there's how can there be this much tannin in Merlot? But it is. So yes, so I think it's an amazing thing what happens when you grow the Merlot up on the Montebello Ridge. So, and I think it's why it's such a great component to the Montebello wine itself, but also you can really enjoy it as a standalone. And again, it's a wine that you will be rewarded with aging. I think these Merlots that we make for Montebello, you give them 10 years and you're just really going to enjoy what's in the glass. But you don't have to. You can enjoy it here when it's this 2017, I think, is in a really good place for drinking right now. So anyway, well, good. Okay, I think we're ready to move on to the final wine of the flight. And this is kind of a treat because I don't think we've ever we've never featured one of our Essence wines in a tasting like this before. So it's going to be kind of fun to present this to you. And what we have today is the 2020 Geyserville Essence. And I think we'll go ahead just let maybe John start and first maybe explain to us, John, what is an essence and how do we make an essence?
So essence is what we use to refer to our dessert wine that we have made from Petit Syrah, but almost always is made from Zinfandel, and it's it's a naturally sweet wine. And what I mean by that is, and it's an important distinction, is that this is not a fortified wine. The sort of classic way of making many red dessert wines is that you ferment the grapes up to a given point, maybe 11% alcohol, and then you add spirits to it, which raises the alcohol, but then arrests fermentation so that you have this residual sugar. That's not what we do with essence. Essence is, and this is the reason we don't make it every year, is that it really requires a large amount of sugar, super ripe grapes. And the reason that's so important is because yeast is quite finicky, and it operates sort of in a little Goldilocks zone. So if you pick grapes that have relatively low sugar would be we use Brix as the unit. So 22 Brix, roughly 22% by weight is sugar. Is a low amount that would produce a wine that, say, is 11.5% or maybe 12% final alcohol. The yeast love that kind of a situation because they will take that sugar and ferment it in a heartbeat, and it would be completely dry. If you go all the way to the other side of the spectrum and you have something that's 37, 38 bricks, which is a huge amount of sugar, there's so much sugar that the yeast actually stop fermenting somewhere around 12%. And then we have this large amount of residual sugar, which is just naturally present. So you don't have that sort of a port-like wine, which will be, much more in the 18, maybe even 20% alcohol range. So I think that's one of the reasons that the Essence is so popular, is because you're getting that that sweet dessert experience without the higher alcohol. So that's what Essence is. And that's, I think we made one in 17, and now have made one here from a block of Geyserville in 2020, which is, I think it's delicious. The other thing that's really neat about this is that it ages forever. I mean, we have Dave probably can remember better than I mean, how far back our vintages of Essence go, but they really you can pull them out at 30 years and they're beautiful wines.
So Dave, talk a little bit more about this this block, and also talk about how we used to try to make Essence with some of our growers, and we and that kind of stopped, and we kind of focused more on our own vineyards. And tell the story about why that's so.
Yeah, well, the very first Essence was from Benito Ducey's vineyard down in Paso. And it was kind of by mistake. I think it was in 80, I'd have to look, 80 in the 80s, 84 maybe. And when Benny got wind of it, he was aghast because he didn't want his grapes to, go into a sweet wine. And even though it was really good. And so, and it's also, it's a real sacrifice because you take these vines, and the way we do it is we'll designate a few rows or a part of a block, and we will thin the grapes very early on, down to, we'll remove the wings on the clusters, and maybe only go to one cluster per shoot, something like that. So we thin them more than we would normally, and then we just sit and wait. And it used to be that we would kind of try to make it every year, but there are a couple of things that kind of take precedence over in Essence. And the one of them is the weather. The weather really has to cooperate. You have to have a fairly early season, and then you have to be able to let those grapes dry, hang maybe another extra month from when we would normally pick them. So the weather has to cooperate. That's really important. The other thing that is important is, and even though Essence is really great, it doesn't pay the bills. These grapes would usually go into Geyserville, right? So if we're looking at a low crop year, so name most of the drought years were fairly low crop years. So we ended up saying, no, we can't sacrifice these vines for an Essence. They need to go into Geyserville. So that's the other thing that does it. But the weather is the big wild card, because you're just rolling the dice on that. And so what you end up, so that little cluster that you saw just there on the screen, what that ends up when we actually pick it is it looks more like a dried on the vine raisin. So everything's pretty shriveled. Some of the interior berries might still have a lot of, bit of juice in them, but most of them are really, really raisiny. And so it takes forever to extract that sugar from, during fermentation. And the yeast just can't do it. It's this similar concept of jam. Why does jam stay stable for so long? There's just too much sugar. The osmotic potential is too much for those poor little yeast.
Yeah, I remember the story too, where Benny's neighbors came over and they were giving him a hard time because it's like, well, how come you haven't picked those grapes yet? And you're losing money because, you know, you get paid by the ton and those things are shrinking up every day. And then the birds are circling and the birds are coming in and feasting. And, you know, by the time it's all said and done, the amount of weight and grapes that came out of there was significantly reduced, right? So I think we tried to make it up for him and pay him a little bit, you know, pay him a little higher rate per ton because of the fact we'd asked him to go through this. But I think he told us, nope, that's it, never again. I can't stand my neighbors coming over and making fun of me when I've got this block of grapes that are just shriveling before our eyes. So we sort of
Yeah,
learned a lesson.
And Benny was a patient man in many ways, but he was not patient when it came to picking grapes. He wanted to pick them because,
Yeah.
you know, he knows how hard it is to grow grapes and to get them to all the way through to the very end of, you know, to get them through to harvest, and then to wait on it was not in his cards. He did not.
No. No, he wants the money in the bank, not in the bird's belly, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, that was pretty good. So after that, we pretty much focused on doing it in our own vineyards, and it's really a treat because again, it's only, you know, we can't do this every year. The weather has to cooperate, and even the fermentation has to cooperate because it's not always guaranteed that the fermentation will proceed in a way that we can get the result that we want, or we may need.
It's risky.
Yeah, it
yeah.
can, yeah, things can go wrong.
Yeah,
or,
it's risky. Yeah, you can develop volatile acidity. You can develop all kinds of, you know, side effects that the
that you
yeast
don't want. Yeah.
from unhappy yeast. So you really, it doesn't seem like it, but that is a wine that really needs just the utmost attention. It needs to be totally babied.
Yeah. And so again, it's kind of, it's special when we are able to actually go from start to finish and produce that delicious wine. And it's a wine we're just now has just become available for sale in the tasting rooms. And so it's and just in time for the holidays too, because there's no better way really to finish a meal than with a glass of the Essence. And as John pointed out, it's nice when you can enjoy that glass and you don't have to worry about, you know, as much alcohol as some of the other dessert wines that you could choose from. So it's really pretty terrific. Okay, I think any other comments on the Essence itself? No? Good. All right. Well, I think we've kind of reached the end of our time together here, and I'm glad you were able to take some time to join us and share your thoughts on the chat about the wines and interact and ask a few good questions as well. So with that, I think we're going to say cheers, everyone, and enjoy a good glass of Ridge and the upcoming holidays. So here's to you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.